So, Daddy, you just turned 64.
64, yeah. Yep, sure did.
Where were you born?
I was born in Los Angeles, California.
Where are we now?
This is basically the east side. We're at 48th Street Park, maybe 3 blocks away from the Pueblos. This is where I grew up. This is where I started my first boys league, boys club, right here at this park in 1973. I started the boys club in the summer of '73, and out of that, I started working with kids between 7 years old to about 16. And I had a basketball team, I had a baseball team, and we traveled from park to park at that time, back in 1973. We played baseball, challenging other kids at other sites in baseball and basketball. At that time, I didn't realize that certain parks were designated as a gang park. Didn't even come in my mind. I just thought that the parks were open to everybody, which means I could utilize the park without being told to get out. So I went there. I went to Dinker Avenue Park. I went to a number of parks when we played their kids in baseball and basketball. Didn't bother me one bit. And after we started playing basketball and baseball that summer, we went camping. I took the kids camping up in the mountains where the Boy Scouts go camping. Over off of in Firestone Mountains. That summer of '73.
Well, before all of this happened, where did you live?
I lived on 52nd Street.
How far away is it from here?
It's about 4 blocks going south. 4 blocks from here. It's the address I lived at was 1607 East 52nd Street, and I lived there from 1956 through 1967. The house we lived in was a family house. It belonged to my mother, my uncles, and my mother. My mom had to move because she couldn't pay the taxes and they didn't help her. So we moved in 1967. We moved to over on Crenshaw, between Adams and Washington.
Which way is that way?
That's going west. Going west. My mother got
where's west from here? Point to it.
West. Going that way. West. This is west. That way.
And then where's Crenshaw from here?
West. West. We moved over there. My mother started asking around, and they had public assistance housing because we didn't have any money enough to get a house, or another house, or an apartment. So she got involved with a program called, at that time, was Section 8 in 1967, and it was based on me going to high school, my grades, staying out of trouble. But I had a job. I kept a job.
Right.
I had a job.
And we'll get to that, but I wanted to ask you, Dad. I know, your mother and my grandmother had a unusual story. At that time, in terms of she was married young and then was a divorcee, and then ultimately had you at a later age.
Right. Well, my mother was an orphan. She was an orphan at 5 years old. Her father died in 1920. His name was William Everett Fitzgerald Hicks. and he died here in Los Angeles. His family was from Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri. My mother's mother, Cleopatra Kennedy, she was from the same place. She was from Kansas City, Kansas, also, and they got married at a very young age. And he died of blood poisoning. He got some blood poisoning in his arm, and they wanted to cut his arm off, amputate his arm. He wouldn't let them, so he died at 32 years old. My grandmother died 9 years later from kidney failure. She was 38 years old. She died in 1929. My mother eventually told me the story of her life, and it was pretty bad because her family was very wealthy. And she told me that her uncle was a very powerful man in Kansas, and she called him Uncle Charlie. And she lived with him for a period of time, along with her other uncles, Uncle Johnny, Uncle Popey.
Well, you know, back to your mother, and well, she had children at a relatively early age. Your siblings,
16, 17 years old. My mother did.
So your siblings, you had a older brother and an older sister.
I had an older brother, older sister.
And but they were twice your age by the time you came.
Yes.
To being. So.
Yeah. My sister.
You were really the only child at that moment.
Pretty much. Pretty much. I was the only child, not knowing my situation at all. I lived with my mother. My mother eventually took in Richard, who was a year older than me, a year and 10 days.
And who's Richard?
Richard's my nephew, Richard Augustine. He had a mental problem at such an early age, and so my mom looked after him, along with looking after me and another nephew. His name was Willie Norman, the fourth or fifth. He was my nephew. He was a year younger than me, and so he lived with us too for a short period of time. Then my mom got real bad financially for us, and my mom had to give him back to my brother, and he took him back to his mother, Betty. I don't know her last name, but she was married to my brother. They were married, but my brother.
Now your brother, who was 20 years older than you.
He was 18.
He was 18 years older than you.
Uh-huh.
He was a standout athlete.
Yes.
In the city of Los Angeles.
Yes. At Manual Arts High School, he was also the band majorette. He was in charge of the band. He was the first black person to lead the band. He played the drums.
And he ultimately became a war hero.
Yes, in the Korean War. He got a lot of medals in the Korean War. My mom claims that it drove him crazy because when he came home, he used to sleep with his eyes open. Right after he came back from the Korean War.
Did he expose you to the concepts of hand-to-hand combat?
Well, that's an interesting point. No, I picked that up from my mother because my mother knew something about either jiu-jitsu or judo, and when I would get on her nerves, she would choke me. Use me, put a judo chokehold or jiu-jitsu chokehold on me, flip me over, and I was about 8 or 9 years old, and she was good with her hands. She knew that. She told me that she had went to the Japanese temple in downtown LA with a guy named Mr. Watanabe, who she knew, and he taught her. He took her and she went there to the temple.
Right.
to learn martial arts for about 5 years.
Well, you always claim that because of the the psychological, physical abuse and abandonment that you had to get a job early, and ultimately you stayed at this job with the Chinese family, and you stayed in the parks with the other boys that were living in the same situation like you.
Right. What happened was in 1965, I had been hanging around this grocery store since I was a little boy. I was a baby, and they would have me deliver groceries and stuff like that for them, or they would give me something, you know, on the side. Then in '65, when I turned, I was 14 years old. He asked me, did I want to work in this grocery store in 1965, and I went home and told my mother that the man hired me to come work in this store at 65.
Now, was this the same year as the Watts riots?
Yes. And I didn't work a complete year because the store got burned up. Then they rebuilt the store, and what happened was I started working full-time in the latter part of '65 when they rebuilt the store, from '65 through 1976 full-time.
Let's go over to the store now, Dad.
Okay, here we go. We're gonna go over to the store. We're gonna get in the car and go to the store. We're gonna drive over there. Come on.
Where you used to work.
Yeah, this is
Since what? How old were you? How old were you when you started working there?
14.
You were 14.
Yes.
Okay, and then. Well, let's go over there now.
All right.
Okay.